At some point, it administrated close to 950,000 acres of land. More than about 7,000 people were baptized in a matter of 45 years. The active population was about 3,000, which was the largest of any mission. He built about 5 missions in a matter of 3 years, I believe. And San Luis Rey was one of those 5 missions. Actually, it was the last one.
Welcome to California Frontier, the show about the often overlooked and unexpected early history of the place we call California. I'm your host, Damian Basic. Today, I'm honored to have with me Helena Hazleton, who is the director of the museum, correct me if I'm wrong, at Mission San Luis Rey de Francia in Oceanside, California. So I'm hoping that today we're going to have an interesting conversation about some of the things that I think are really unique about this mission. And Helena has a lot of expertise and a lot of background. So thank you, Helena, for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
We met about maybe a year and a half ago. I think it was probably in the spring or April, I think in April of 2023, when the California Missions Foundation organized a day at Mission San Luis Rey, if I'm not mistaken. And you provided some really interesting tours of the mission grounds, the church. And I came away really wanting to know more about this mission and really impacted by the uniqueness of it and the different, its history and the different artifacts and artworks and things that are there. So before we begin, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and how you wound up working with Mission San Luis Rey?
Well, I am not from California. I'm originally from Mexico City. I was born and raised there. I went to school to study art history. I studied at Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City, and I ended up starting my career mostly teaching, but I also worked from about 2012 to 2017 at Museo Sumaya, which houses one of the largest private art collections in the world, and it has a beautiful Spanish colonial collection as well. I came to California in 2017, just randomly. My husband lived here, and we met before I moved in. We decided to get married. It was just easy for me to come here. And we ended up living 3 blocks from Mission San Luis Rey and trying to find something to do in a completely new place for me. I came to Mission San Luis Rey and I stayed, and I've been here for a little over 7 years now.
Wow. Well, not so random. Pretty intentional in some ways, but that's great. So I guess you saw a connection between your background and your expertise and what was going on at the mission, I assume.
Absolutely. Coming from Mexico City, it's very clear that missions are familiar to us for many different reasons. But the thing that attracted me to the mission is, well, I went into the church and I saw a couple of paintings and the statues that are on display in the church. And I just thought that this is where I belong.
Yeah.
Making sure that I'm studying what is going on in here.
Well, good. I think you're doing a real service to all of us who want to know more about the history of California, especially as it connects to Mexico and to the Spanish Empire and to these places that I think that, most Californians grow up learning about the missions when they're in 4th grade. And I think that's great. I try to support that, as you probably know.
Yep. I run a 4th grade program at the museum.
There you go. So, but
Mhm.
oftentimes that's it, right? That's where it stops.
Mhm.
And when you
Yeah.
talk to people about their knowledge of the mission era, of the California missions, and that time of its history, either they're very dismissive. Well, yeah, we did a mission project when I was in fourth grade, or
Mhm.
they know very little at all, or they've heard just some basic things.
Mhm.
But being there, you were able to pull out a lot of very nuanced and fascinating aspects of that place and of that time period. So I'm wondering, before we get deep into that, could you maybe give us a little bit of a sketch of Mission San Luis Rey, how it started, a little background on its history?
So, to make a really long story short, Mission San Luis Rey is the 18th of the California missions that were established. It's one of the latest ones, but it was also one of the largest. One of the things that friars and explorers noticed in the late 1790s is that there was a need for a mission that connected San Diego and San Juan Capistrano. So there were a few attempts to find a suitable location for the mission, and they ended up in a valley. Uh, Today it's called the San Luis Rey Valley, where the original Payamcahuichon people live, or the Luiseño people, as they are known officially today. They established the mission. Father Lasuen came June of 1798 to perform a baptismal ceremony. 6 weeks later, he left a very young Father Antonio Peyri in charge of building a community and building what would be the foundation, the structure of the building. And the mission just started growing then, and it didn't stop until Mexican secularization. Um, it became the largest, the most productive of California missions. At some point, it administrated close to 950,000 acres of land. More than we have the padrones and the inventories. In the 1820s, there were more than 50,000 heads of cattle, several ranches, rancherias, and asistencia that depended on Mission San Luis Rey. More than about 7,000 people were baptized in a matter of 45 years. The active population was about 3,000, which was the largest of any mission. And it just was a very powerful institution.
So this is really, I think, something that a lot of people don't understand. Mission San Luis Rey is directly north of San Diego in
Yes.
Oceanside, what is today Oceanside.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned it's the 18th of the missions.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
why so late? Well, 1798. Yeah. Why so late? And even though it's right a few miles up north from San Diego.
Well, we don't know exactly why so late. What I know is that Father Lasuen, in the late 1790s, he set up in a program, an institution to connect pre-existing missions where he saw the need, because there were a few rancherias, or because the friars were tired of traveling maybe more than a day to do a funeral or a baptism. So he built about 5 missions in a matter of 3 years, I believe. And San Luis Rey was one of those 5 missions. Actually, it was the last one. Uh, and it came in an attempt to connect to pre-existing missions. So people here uh, were served by either San Juan Capistrano or San Diego, but it was hard for the friars on either of those missions to travel more than a day to minister in these rancherias and populations. It was also a different tribe that spoke a different language. The Kumeyaay and the Luiseño have different languages, so they saw the need to bring a particular institution for the Luiseño
And so
people.
the Kumeyaay are the people who live in the vicinity of Mission San Diego.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And can you just remind everyone of those two terms that you used? You use the term rancheria and a term
Hmm.
asistencia. Can you tell us a little bit about what
Yep.
those mean?
Well, rancherias were small populations, mostly of indigenous people. Some of them were people who were already baptized, and other villages were people that were still yet to be baptized, but already had an idea of what being at a mission was part of. An assistencia is like a submission. It's a center of operation of Mission San Luis Rey or any other mission that had an assistencia, but in a separate location. Sometimes when missions were or administrate large territories, it was necessary to have an assistencia to either store grains or have a small chapel that can minister people, and it would depend completely on the big mission. Assistencia, well, San Antonio de Pala, which was the assistencia of Mission San Luis Rey, uh, it's unofficially known by some people as the 22nd mission because of how important it was.
Yeah, San Antonio de Pala is also a
Mm-hmm.
really interesting place, and it's still a functioning church and parish. Yeah, so that was the most important asistencia connected to Mission San Luis Rey, and
Mm-hmm.
so what I understand is that there were populations of people who lived out there at these
Mm-hmm.
asistencias, and it was
Yes.
the mission padre who would come from time to time to visit
Mm-hmm.
them, right?
Yes.
Okay. How many, do you know offhand how many asistencias were connected to Mission San Luis Rey?
Well, the only official assistencia was San Antonio de
Okay.
Pala, but there were granaries and small buildings at Las Flores and Rancho Santa Margarita, which are today they're part of a military base and marine base, Camp Pendleton.
Oh, that's right. You know what? In fact, I had the privilege of visiting Santa Margarita Las Flores on Camp Pendleton last summer, and I
Mm-hmm.
have some really cool footage that I need to edit and put
I'm
up.
going
Oh,
next
you
week.
are?
Yeah, we are going. The docents and I are doing a field trip next
That's a
week. Yeah.
really interesting place, and very few
Mm-hmm.
people get to go visit because it's on Camp
Mm-hmm.
Pendleton on the Marine base.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, so that's really interesting. So at its height, you said that the mission was one of the most, if not the largest and most productive of the
Mm-hmm.
mission chain. Um,
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about the phases of its history? Obviously, there's a time when it was recently founded, then there's its height, and then
Mm-hmm.
you have the. Can you talk a little bit about that? How the arc of the history of this mission?
It starts. It's a rare case of a mission that starts
Mm.
strong with a population that starts growing very fast. There is like a early phase of growth between I would say 1798 to around 1810 when the mission starts becoming productive. The construction of the mission church. The mission church is one of the most beautiful mission churches, in my
I think so
opinion.
too.
It's certainly the largest, the only one that is still standing on a cruciform layout. The construction of the church was reflective of that period of growth. The mission starts with a small chapel that they eventually expand, but by 1811, uh, it was not enough. They thought they needed a larger church. So they set up a construction of the current church that we have, third church. And construction of the church took place between, I would say, 1811 to 1815. That's when it's finished.
So,
Uh,
go ahead.
yeah. No, you were
Well,
asking.
when you say 1811 to 1815, it makes me think that there was a massive earthquake in 1812. So, how
Yes.
did this mission manage to survive that earthquake while San Juan Capistrano up the road was
Mhm.
destroyed and so many people died?
Well, the church was under construction back then. And there was an architect. You might have heard of the architect that traveled from missions to mission, letting friars know that he was available. He brought manuscripts, and he came to see what was done after the earthquake. We had only one wall that was built then, the east wall. Construction was adapted a little bit. There are legends. This is not something that was recorded anywhere, but most people still believe that the original two bell tower plan that they had initially was adapted, because San Juan Capistrano, the reason why the church was destroyed is one of the bell towers fell into the nave of the
Okay.
church. The earthquake. Some people think that that might have been something that changed the layout or the construction of the church. We are not very sure if that was actually the case, but we have one bell tower, and construction was adapted. There were some things that people used to do back in the day to reinforce a building if there was an earthquake, like to build wider walls, make less windows, open less windows, reinforce more with more columns, a smaller roof as well. So there were things that were adapted, but Mission San Luis Rey, because the church was not finished when when the earthquake came, it did not change the layout too much. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. It's amazing to think that, here we are in California, and 200 years ago, the earthquakes are something immemorial here in California. You always had to be dealing with them. And the fact that they adapted the architecture of the building while it's being built in order to withstand earthquakes is really interesting, especially given the fact that so many of the missions now are being required to be retrofitted for seismic activity. Has San Luis Rey needed to go through a modern retrofit?
Yes, it was finished a little over 10 years ago. Our church has been retrofitted. Yes.
Okay. And then what about secularization? We know that in the 1830s, right, the missions are secularized. That is, they're put in the hands of lay administrators. What was that process like at Mission San Luis Rey?
Well, secularization comes in the early 1830s. And when the friars that were in California are given the option of either swear allegiance to a new government or go back to Spain, the person who administrated the mission, Father Antonio Peyri, who was a very powerful man, he decides to go back to Spain. So that was the first thing that affected the mission, because after his departure, the mission just started losing more and more of its territory to the political favors that the Mexican governors started doing. Father Peyri leaves. That's another thing that is special about Mission San Luis Rey. The plan Father Peyri had after secularization, because he doesn't live on his own. He takes with him two young boys who grew up at the mission, Agapito Amamix, Pablo Tac. And his plan was to put these boys, they were 12 and 10. Agapito was 12, Pablo was 10. His plan was to find a Franciscan school for the boys where they can become missionaries, and they are the ones who can come back and continue the labor that he did for 30-something years. After a 2-year trip that takes them to Mexico City, then New York, and then Rome, the boys stay at the Colegio de la Propaganda Fide in Rome, and Father Peyri goes back to Spain. The last thing people know about him is that he was trying to get a passport to come back to California, but there's nothing else that people know after that. We know he never came back. He was elderly, he was sick, and he probably died in Spain, although nobody knows for sure where he was buried, probably close to his hometown near Barcelona. He was from Catalonia, and the boys stayed in Rome.
So,
until
so
passed away
you're
too.
right. Yes. So Pablo Tac
Hmm.
writes the only grammar of indigenous language in California at the time, right? And he writes a
Yes.
story
Hmm.
of his life at the mission.
Hmm.
The Propaganda Fide, that's the college in Rome where missionaries were trained, right?
Yes.
So the idea was that these young men would come back to California as missionaries to their own people.
Hmm. Yes.
Wow, that's really interesting. Now, Father, but their life is cut short by disease, I'm assuming.
Yes. Agapito dies, I believe it was
Mm,
smallpox, at the age of 17 in Rome. And Pablo was also affected. He was sick, but when he was around 16, 17 years old, he catches the attention of an important person, Cardinal Giuseppe Mesofanti. He was a linguist, important person in Rome as well. And it is Cardinal Mesofanti who encourages Pablo to write the story of his people, and it's the grammar of his language as well. Without knowing, Pablo Tac probably saved his
mm,
language.
mm-hmm.
It is the Luiseño are still struggling to save their language, and it's probably Pablo Tac the one that helped, because he left a written record of how the language sounded.
Right.
Uh, Yep, Pablo Tac, after struggling with being ill for a few years, he also dies pretty young in Rome.
Yeah, what a shame. I've read
Yeah.
through his grammar and his
Hmm.
story, the conversion of San Luiseños, and it's
Hmm.
not only written in Spanish and Luiseño, it's in Latin as
Hmm.
well. So
Yeah.
he was very well educated there,
Hmm.
and yeah, what it's really interesting to think how history might have been different had he survived and had he come back to California.
Yes.
So Peri was the Franciscan who really sort of made the mission into what it was. Can you tell us a little bit more about him? You mentioned he was a very powerful man.
Well, Pablo Tac in his manuscript describes him as basically living the life of a king. He had a small court, according to Pablo Tac, and pages, but he was also a very intelligent and a very good administrator. I believe that's what made Mission San Luis Rey so prosperous. It was his view and his administration, basically, and his willingness to negotiate with the local people as well. Um, you hear stories of how there were other rebellions at missions like Santa Barbara, San Diego. Particularly this year, it's the 200th anniversary of the Chumash riots, the rebellions. That was never an issue at San Luis Rey, and it was probably because Father Peyri was a good negotiator. He knew how much to intervene, and I'm not saying that the native people lived a pretty life at the mission. That was not the case. It was the 1800s. You would still have alcaldes, mayordomos, soldiers, and there are some pretty cruel accounts of life at the mission. But I also believe that Father Perry understood how much he could get away with without making enemies for himself.
Right. That's a
Mhm.
really important talent,
And
right? Especially out on the
mhm.
frontier. And people
Yeah.
forget that even though the Spanish were in charge of this territory that they were colonizing, they were the small minority compared to the indigenous
Hmm.
people that were around.
Yep.
And I think just looking recently at statistics, and I mean, indigenous people were the vast majority in California up until just following the gold rush, right?
Hmm.
So you had to be very astute in order to maintain this equilibrium, like you said, when an
Hmm.
uprising was possible at any time if things went sideways. And as people may know, there we have a great interview with Dr. John Johnson
Hmm.
from Santa Barbara, who used to direct the Santa Barbara Natural History Museum about the Chumash uprising, which is really fascinating. If you haven't listened to it, you should go back and listen to it. So what about the period then between, say, the time that Father Peyri leaves and the time that the U.S. takes over? What was life like at the mission then?
Well, that's the period of decay. Um, a few friars come and go, but also the land, because it was a very powerful territory. It was disputed by the Mexican governors that were assigning land grants for themselves. Pio Pico, for example, sold a property of Mission San Luis Rey to his own brother.
And Pio Pico
And
was Mexican governor of California in the mid
yes.
1840s, up until the time of the U.S. Occupation.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So so this was a time of decay, and then
Mm-hmm.
1846, U.S. The war breaks out between U.S. and Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
The United States annexes Alta California, which then becomes, in 1850, the state of California. What happens to the mission? It goes through a period of decay. Obviously, when you come now, it doesn't seem like it's in decay. I mean, it seems like an old
No.
place that sometimes needs refurbishing, but it looks beautiful. So what happened then to bring it to the state that it's in now?
Well, the mission was far from towns or pueblos that would have a community that can save the mission. That leads to a period of complete abandonment, about 46 years of abandonment. There was a nearby village, the San Luis Rey village, which was mostly a native village, but there were some pioneers that were part of the population as well. We have a few ranches that form from what used to be Mission San Luis Rey territory. Um, Rancho Margarita and Las Flores become private ranchos. We have Rancho Guajome, Rancho Buena Vista, which is in the city of Vista today, Rancho Monserrate, the city of Fallbrook. All these ranchers just become farmers, ranchers, and employ the native population while the building was abandoned and there was a period of decay, basically. The building is when you have an abandoned building and you have nearby populations, you will see bricks being stolen, tiles being taken from the roof, and little by little the building starts just collapsing in ruins, basically. There were some attempts to rescue valuable objects. Um, you might have heard of a woman originally from San Diego. She was an immigrant and from Mexico too, Apolinaria
Oh yeah,
Lorenzana.
yeah.
She comes to the mission after Father Salvidea passed away. So the last two priests, resident priests at Mission San Luis Rey, were Father Jose de Ibarra and Father Salvidea as well. Father Salvidea is famous because he ministered for over 30 years at Mission San Gabriel. He died actually here in Mission San Luis Rey, and he is buried in this church. So after his death, Apolinaria comes over to save paperwork, to save a few valuable objects. They take the vestments to Mission Santa Barbara, and the rest is just an abandoned building with nothing much to see. During the Mexican-American War, the Mormon Battalion ends their quest here at Mission San Luis Rey as well, and they help just do land surveys, understand what is going on with the building. But the Mormon Battalion also leaves after they're discharged, and the mayor, Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau, another thing that makes this mission special, the son of Sacagawea, was the first mayor of San Luis Rey in 1947. He also ends up quitting because there was nothing to save. And he had no power, no control over anything, and he goes back north. So the building is completely abandoned. A few surveyors just trying to establish maps come and goes. And it is until about 1865 when the leftover mission lands, it was about 60 acres of land, are granted back to the Catholic Church by Abraham Lincoln, only about 3.5 weeks before he was killed.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. March 18th. Mm-hmm.
In fact, if I recall correctly, in the museum, isn't there the document with Lincoln's signature where he returns the land to the Catholic Church? Is that right?
Yes, we have the document on display with Abraham Lincoln's signature.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the California Frontier Show. If you'd like to support the show, the best thing to do is to let other people know about it. If you'd like to support it monetarily, there are a couple ways of doing that. One is by scrolling down in your podcast app to where it says support the show. There you can become a subscriber for as little as $3 a month. And if you want to give a one-time donation, just below you'll see where it says give a one-time donation. Finally, the show is supported by California History Teachers, which is a full year of lessons for 4th grade California history and social studies. You can find out more at www.californiahistoryteachers.com. And if you input the coupon code PODCAST, you'll receive 25% off your monthly or annual subscription. So check it out.